Hi guys, and welcome to a new video. Today I want to show you how I created this witch fan art illustration. I used to read the witch comics a lot when I was a young teenager, and the art definitely inspired me to start drawing on my own, and a lot of the images are still very present in my brain. In this video today, I'm going to be focusing a little bit more on the sketching process and the second and third and fourth sketch layer and the line art, a little bit more than the coloring part, because the coloring part is just a lot of very tedious blending, especially when you have 5 characters is a lot of the same. So I'm going to be focusing a little bit more on the sketching phase. I'm starting out with my very rough sketch already done. I wanted to pose them in sort of a complete composition that forms a shape of its own. I always find those compositions very pleasing, and it's a little bit of puzzle work, which also makes it a little bit more fun. What I do now is that I lower the opacity of my very basic sketch layer and start creating my second sketch layer on top. This second sketch layer is here to define the shapes a little bit more, to get more of a grasp on how I want to pose the figures, and to see if the rough ideas and gestures that I had in my head actually work in the shape. I'm not focusing on perfect anatomy at this point, because I'm gonna be taking reference pictures later on to make sure that the hands and all the other limbs and poses are making sense. Right now, it's just about defining a little bit more. You can see me picking up things and moving them around a lot, which is something I love so much about digital art. You're not fixed to the place that you put something down. I mean, of course, you can erase in traditional art, but it's just a lot more difficult. And in digital, I can just pick up an arm or an elbow and just twist it, shrink it, or move it around until it sits perfectly. In an illustration with multiple figures, it's always really important to make sure that they're all the same size, like their heads are the same size, so if you would stand them next to each other, they would work together. I'm also trying to adapt the different face shapes that the original artist has given the different characters to my illustration. So Cornelia, for example, has a more elongated face, and Hylin has quite wide set eyes and a little bit more of a round, squished face. It's really important to zoom out of your drawing, like really far every now and then, because then you can see if the overall shape is readable. Because only if you can kind of get an idea of what the illustration is about from afar, only then it's gonna work close up. I kind of struggled putting in the wings at the end there, because I didn't consider them in my first composition, which is not very smart of me. Always consider all elements of your figures, be it wings or be it magical stuff like the elements that I'm gonna put in later. Always consider everything. And then we go into the second sketch layer. In this illustration, I really wanted to get everything right before I went into line art, so that's why I'm doing a second sketch layer. This is not something I do every time, but when I have such a big illustration with so many elements, I sometimes use a second sketch layer just to define a little bit more what I'm doing. Also, now I've started to put reference pictures in. I just took the reference pictures myself, or of myself. It's really the easiest way to get good reference pictures. You might feel a little bit silly and a little bit dumb, but it cuts down the Googling time for the right reference pictures by a lot. I mainly use my reference pictures to draw the hands, because I personally really like my hands to look somewhat realistic and like they are working. Of course, I have really sped up this process in my video. This usually takes a really long time, but it's really important to have that good sketch layer base so that everything you paint on top or when you color the figures, everything works. It's always important to have that good base layer. Please let me know in the comments if any one of you have read the Witch comics, or I think there was also a TV show, I'm not 100% sure. I only read the comics when I was young. Please tell me if you have seen them or read them as well, if they inspired you to do art. Please tell me who your favorite character was. Mine was, I think, Hylin, definitely, because she was a Gemini and I'm a Gemini and an artist, so I really identified myself with her. And I really liked her goofy, funny side. But I also really liked Cornelia. Definitely really liked her as well. So tell me who your favorite witch character was in the comments below, please. Alright, now that we've finished our second sketch layer and everything is really nicely defined, I started doing the line art. For the line art, I'm using the Gazinki ink brush in PROCREATE, which I really like. It has a nice line diversity. It's very pressure sensitive, so I really like this one. For the sketching, just to let you know, I used the 6B pencil brush. I'm going to speed up that line art process a little bit more and not actually show you every single character, because it's just going over the lines again and again and again and defining even more. Putting in little folds in the clothes, for example, but it's not actually that interesting. Sometimes I find little things even in the line art that I want to change up, and that's a perfect chance to fix little mistakes here and there. Also, it's always important to flip your canvases every now and then to make sure your figures and your faces especially are proportional and not distorted in any way. Just keep that in mind. I always really like the line art stage because it gives me a first indication on how it's gonna look. It looks a lot more cleaner than the sketch, and I don't know, there's something really juicy about some good, clean line art. Now we're going to color. The first part of coloring is, once again, a really boring part. Not really selling this very well. But it's just dropping in all the colors. I would use the color dropper, and I do use it every now and then, but because I'm using a very inky, pressure-sensitive brush, I don't always have my lines super closed. So dropping in the color just with the autofill sometimes doesn't really work. But you can see me using it every now and then. It's really convenient. I'm also not super precious with the initial colors that I put down. You will see me changing out the tones, shifting the hues a little bit on mostly all of the colors I put down. For me, it's just really important to get that initial color down and eradicate as much of this white space as I probably can. Now that I've put down all the initial colors, you can see me starting with a first shading layer. This is a layer I put on the multiply layer style, and I'm using a sort of mid-tone, warm, gray, purpley color. I have this color saved, and it's usually my first shading color because it just works with everything. I can put the exact hexadecimal code for the color into the description box because it's just the perfect shading color in my opinion, if you put it on the multiple layer. And now I just go over the piece and put in sort of, you could call it a cell shading style, so it's very straight edges. This is just for me to see where I want the shading to go. I didn't really do anything fancy with the shading, like no crazy light effects, because that's not really my strongest forte. It's just a general like from the top lighting, nothing super crazy. Shading is really something you kind of have to practice a lot. By now I kind of know where I have to shade, and it's more, I don't have to think as much about it, but it's definitely something I learned over time. What I'm doing now is adding little blushies and redness to the noses, elbows, hands. This is something I really like to do because it gives my characters a little bit more life, makes them look a little bit more rosy and awake. You can see me do this on all the 5 characters, sometimes changing up the color of the blush depending on the skin tone. Now I'm going in with a second shadow layer, trying to define the shapes a little bit more, and I'm also starting to blend out the initial shadow layer. I always flip-flop in between wanting cell shading and sometimes wanting a more blended style, so in this piece I ultimately decided that I wanted it to be a little bit more blended. What I'm also doing is I'm starting to work on top of my line art layer. This might seem a little bit counterintuitive to put down line art first and then covering it up. It's not the best process, I guess, but I wasn't really 100% sure how I wanted to color this piece, and only decided like midway through that I wanted it to be more line-less than with the line art, so I'm covering up my good work again. But that's how it goes, and it's not too much more work. It's just the way it is, and I know for next time that I need to consider a little bit more clearly what I want with the colors in the first place. But also, whilst I'm covering up the line art, I'm defining the shapes even more, and that's essentially what I want, to create definition even without the use of the line art. Just to let you know, I cut out a lot of the coloring part. This is not something that happens in like half an hour. This takes hours and hours of blending, so don't think just because it looks fast in the video that this is not very tedious and very long. Now I'm adding in some highlights, and you can see it's already jumped a lot in the coloring process, but be sure it's just a lot of blending. A lot of blending. And we would be sitting here for hours and hours on end if I were to show you the whole process. You can see I also added the water, fire, earth, and wind, the elements that the witches are conjuring. And I always like to keep my elements especially line art free because that makes them look a little bit more real. I know they don't look super real because it's still a comic style, but if you want to see how to draw elements, I would always recommend looking at Avatar or Korra. They do just the best elemental comic style drawing of water, fire, earth, all that stuff. And you can definitely see me being inspired by that way of drawing in the way I draw my elements. Now that I have colored all my figures, I very reluctantly start working on a background. Backgrounds are really not my forte, and I have to admit I'm always very lazy when it comes to backgrounds. Coloring figures is just what I love, and backgrounds, I just need them to tie the whole piece together. I'm gonna leave this in, but you will see me doing a whole elaborate circle in the background that I'm gonna completely erase in just a few seconds, but there is really no concept in what I do with my backgrounds. I just need something to tie the whole piece together. In the end, I ended up going for an oval shape, which kind of mirrors the shape that the girls are taking. I added a little bit of magic light in the background, and that's basically it. And I actually kind of like it. I like the way it looks. Now I'm adding in just some last minute highlights from the water and working over the air that Hylin is conjuring. Also adding some shine to Tyranny's glasses. This illustration was so much fun to do. I love those characters so much. If you have any suggestions of fan art characters that you want me to draw in the future, just leave them as a comment down below. And there we have it, the finished piece. I'm gonna give you a nice pan up and down, but if you want to see the full piece, you can always check out my Instagram at @CaroTheCreator. And I hope you enjoyed this process. Have a great day, and I'll see you next time. Bye bye!